welcome everyone to the California Institute for School Improvement's webinar focused on youth participatory research, hosted by UC Davis, the School of Education, Center for Applied Policy and Education, in partnership with the Center for Regional Change and the Reed Center here at UC Davis. I'm just going to briefly say hello to you and then hand it over to my colleague, Brandon Louie, who will be leading us through the webinar today. My name is Christina Murdoch, and I am the Executive Director of CAP-Ed, the Center for Applied Policy and Education. And Brandon has been working with our faculty member in the School of Education, Nancy Erbstein, on youth participatory action research. This webinar will also be moderated by my colleague, Carmen Koch, who is a director in the Reed Center here at UC Davis. So with that, Brandon, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Tina, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much for joining us here for today's session. So let me share my screen and get us started here. All right, so my name is Brandon Louie, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement with the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. Really excited to be here, sharing this space with you all today and getting to talk about youth participatory action research. So I want to provide a quick overview of the flow for today's session, review some of the objectives that we have for you all, and do some quick orientation to the webinar space, and then we'll get into the content. So we will start with a quick welcome and intro here. Then we're going to first begin by defining youth participatory action research, so understanding what YPAR is, and then exploring some examples of YPAR projects and potential impacts, particularly with a focus on various educational settings. And then we want to make sure that we orient folks as well to some useful resources that can support you in planning and facilitating YPAR projects. So we'll be looking at the Community Futures Community Lore website and providing a quick walkthrough there. And then we want to talk about some potential next steps as well for folks, and finish with some Q&A as well. And as far as the objectives that we have in mind for attendees, want to make sure that folks are leaving this space with a greater familiarity with youth participatory action research. Want to make sure that folks can learn from various project examples and see what this has looked like in various education settings. Think about the potential benefits and also explore some considerations for potentially launching your own YPAR efforts. I want to make sure that folks are also familiar with some resources to support this work, particularly the Community Futures Community Lore website and toolkit. And then we want to start exploring some potential next steps for where we can go after this conversation, and for those of you who may be thinking about implementing your own YPAR projects. Just really quickly orienting you to your space here in these webinar settings. You'll see that there are some interactive capabilities that are restricted for today, but you do have some opportunities for how you can engage with us. And so you can chat back to us as the panelists and the hosts. We definitely encourage folks to be in that space, to be reacting to what's happening, and to be sharing any information that you'd like to share with us. We also have the Q&A function open, and as mentioned, Carmen will be staffing that space, so feel free to insert your questions there, and we will have a portion at the end to be able to address as many of those as we can, and I'm sure we'll have some additional follow-up to continue that conversation after today as well. And then you do also have the live transcript and closed captions option there at the bottom too, so for folks who'd like either subtitles or live transcripts on the side, you also have that option. So really quickly, just introducing myself and the center that I'm representing. So I'm Brandon Louie, he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the Center for Regional Change. My background is in international development, community organizing, and youth development. I've been at the center now for the past 6 years, and a great deal of the focus of my work has been in supporting youth participatory action research. So really more of a role of a train the trainer, so providing training and coaching and resource development for folks who are on the ground in various settings, working directly with young people in projects. And a little bit about the center that I'm coming from here. So the UC Davis Center for Regional Change, We're a research center at the UC Davis campus supporting collaborative action-oriented research. We work directly with many community stakeholders and community partners in various settings, but we also work really closely with faculty affiliates at our two different campuses, both the health campus and the main UC Davis campus as well. So we're really focused on bringing different disciplines together. We're focused on a really holistic view of community development that looks at the way different issues are connected, that looks at the way different jurisdictions are connected, and tries to look beyond some of our jurisdictions to think with a more regional approach to how we might explore and address some of the issues and challenges that we're facing in our communities. And we really try to keep social justice and equity at the core of all the work that we do. And so certainly these types of participatory approaches and participatory action research are some of the key focus of some of the work that we get to do with partners and get to support both on and off campus. And really a lot of the content from today's presentation reflects one in particular long-term collaboration that we've had with one of the faculty affiliates at the Center for Regional Change. So as mentioned, Nancy Erbstein from the School of Education is here with us, and I've had the pleasure of working with her throughout my time, both as a grad student at UC Davis and with the Center for Regional Change. And much of this work is coming both from our collective efforts and even from some of the work that she's done prior to my time getting to work with her. So to kick things off here, we really want to orient folks and situate us all in becoming a bit more familiar with this practice. We'll do that by first providing some definitions and exploring what this looks like and how it might differ from other approaches to research and to youth development. And we'll definitely look at a lot of examples of what this can look like as well, to think about what have folks done in various settings and what might be possible for all of you to consider in thinking about where you can go with this type of work in the future. So to kick things off, what is YPAR? What is Youth Participatory Action Research? It's a lot of words jumbled together. It's a mouthful, I must say. And it can seem a bit unapproachable as a term. And so, one of the ways that we like to engage folks in thinking about this is by breaking down each of the different terms in thinking about their meaning and their significance and their connection, and then being able to draw a concept as a whole altogether. So in thinking about youth and how they're situated, both in our communities and our society, and also with respect to research, decision-making, and power. So thinking about participation and how folks may be participating or not in issues that affect them. Thinking about the significance of action and how research might be connected to that, right? And so in general, youth participatory action research is really a tool that we can utilize to help young people connect with and use the tools of research to identify, explore, and address issues that they care about in their communities and or in their schools, right? And so what does that entail, and why might a practice that engages young people in research for the purposes of social change, why might that be important, and what might be the significance of that and the uniqueness of a practice like that with relation to other kinds of work that we might do with young people, right? And so in thinking about that again, and thinking about each of these different terms within this greater concept of youth participatory action research, first of all, considering youth. And the ways in which young people are situated in our communities, in our society, in our institutions, right? That, young people often do not have, much decision-making power over issues that affect them directly, right? That they often are not in roles where they can have a say in conditions that directly impact them. And so, both within our communities, youth may be situated lower when it comes to our power dynamic, and then, in thinking also within youth groups as well, right? We see that there are certainly some groups who are more directly impacted by inequities and oppression, right? That there are definitely youth who also have even less access to resources and opportunities within the overall sphere of thinking about the youth population, right? Can you all hear me? Sorry, I think I may have frozen. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. My video is frozen, but I'm going to continue then. So
And for
So-
us, for us, your video is not frozen. So
Oh, weird. All right, it might just be on my end. So, okay, so in that case, thinking about how youth are situated and this really being a vehicle to try and acknowledge and recognize youth in particular as experts in their. And while we're getting that all set up, let me pull my PowerPoint back up. So again, we were talking about young people, right? And the fact that YPAR is really situated to acknowledge youth as experts, to acknowledge youth's abilities to generate knowledge, to use knowledge for their own purposes, right? And to be really critical stakeholders and leaders, not only in the future, but currently in our communities. And so certainly there's a different orientation to youth within YPAR than maybe we typically hear about or see in community in general. And again, that's really leads to the participatory aspects of YPAR as well, right? That the who and the how that this work gets done is also really critical. That YPAR certainly is oriented towards social change and action and making things happen in our communities and on our school sites. But it's also very process oriented, and the fact that how we go about doing these things and how we get to that point is also a really important aspect and requires a lot of intentionality as well, right? And so how we situate youth within the process so that it's youth driven, so that youth are developing leadership, so that youth are making key decisions, and so that youth are actually being able to have and exert power in processes is really critical as well. And so that participation component is also really important, right? In thinking about action as well, that action is really a key focus of this work, and that it's not simply about research that is meant to sit on a shelf. It's not just about research that is, just for the purposes of a very small, isolated, group of scholars to enjoy and appreciate. But it really is about research that is going to move action and change forward, right? And that's where the research component comes in as well, right? That again, that folks can actually conduct their own research, that it doesn't just sit within the university, such as, our university, UC Davis, an R1, research university, but that, really this research should and can be done in direct collaboration with community members, and that can really lead to results that are relevant to communities that are based in their needs, that are meeting them where they are, and that are generating information that really can have a direct impact in systems and institutions that impact their everyday lives, right? So in this sense, something like YPAR is very distinct from more traditional forms of research, right? Where it's often a much more top-down type of a process. And oftentimes communities experience research as being very extractive and exploitative, right? Where an outside researcher might come in, they make all the decisions and determine how it will proceed, what questions will be asked of whom. They analyze the data, and based on what comes out of it, they either publish their articles, and that supports their career and their tenure. But oftentimes communities who participate in these processes are left with the question of, what just happened? Where did that person go? What happened as a result of that? And how did that actually benefit us as a community? And so a practice like YPAR is really meant to really flip those dynamics and the power dynamics that are inherent within research, and really go about it in a much different type of intentional way, in situating community members not as research subjects, but really as those who can define and conduct research for themselves and for their own purposes. And so through a practice like YPAR, we're really trying to help build the capacity of young people to do this work effectively, helping them connect with their lived experiences, helping them identify issues that they care about, helping them figure out what is already known about those issues, and then through that process figuring out what might they want to know more about. And that could lead to a research question and a research design that helps them investigate an issue more deeply, and based on the information that they generate, then figuring out, how do we need to get this information out there? Who needs to hear about it? And how do we then really develop an action campaign that's going to effectively push for the recommendations and changes that we want to see happen in our communities? So, it is an involved process, as I'm sure you can imagine. And, to help us think through and conceptualize, well, what can that actually look like in practice? How do we think about this approach? I want to bring forth here this resource from our Community Futures Community Lore tools. So these are the stepping stones that we utilize to define the different stages that can happen in a YPAR project, and to help us think through, all right, well, what can this look like in practice? And while this is currently designed and laid out here in what seems to be a very linear fashion, it's important to think about how all of these steps and stages build upon one another, and also think about how they could really be cyclical as well, so that there are stages that occur at different points, and there might be pieces that happen throughout a project, and certainly there are elements where we might come back to stages as well. But in general, this is meant to really help define what a project can look like, and to think about how we might think of organizing it and laying it out. So as you can see, there's some pre-project elements where we're thinking about how we prepare for a project, how we lay the groundwork and foundation, which may be where some of you are situated currently, and that's a good place to be. But when you have a project designed and you've got folks who you've brought together, you've got a team of young people, there's team building that has to occur. Then helping them identify the issue that they care about, prioritize what they'd like to learn more about, utilizing that to develop a research plan. Of course, there's a lot of skill building and training that occurs that has to help them prep for doing that kind of work in research. Then, through that effort, collecting data, analyzing the results, developing findings and recommendations, and then moving into action. Right. And so to think about, what can that look like in reality, within our school systems, just utilizing an example from one effort that we've supported that was in Pescadero at their high school, and the Youth Food Alliance, which was a group of young people where they brought together a team of 8 youth at the high school. They were meeting during their lunch period time, so kind of an out of school time effort where they were coming together as a club. These young people decided that they wanted to focus on improving the school meals program. This was an effort in collaboration with CalFresh Healthy Living, University of California. So focused on SNAP Ed efforts, so food access, water access, physical activity, nutrition. So they decided to focus on their school meals program. As far as their research design, they decided to survey peers and conduct taste tests as a part of figuring out, what did food look like in their cafeteria? How were young people feeling about it? What did they want to see happen? And then as a result of that, they ended up presenting their findings back to their school and district officials. They also attended the Childhood Obesity Conference, were able to do a poster presentation and connect with other youth and others working in this space on a statewide and even national level. And then as a result of their research and advocacy work, they were able to support adding healthy smoothies to their lunch menus at all the different schools in their district. So just one way of thinking about how we might conceptualize this, but then also put it into practice with young people at an educational setting, at a school site, and what might be possible. What are the types of things that youth could investigate, and what are the types of changes and actions that young people might be able to implement, right? So this is just starting to situate us in thinking about, okay, well, what is YPAR? How does it differ from other research approaches or even other youth development approaches? What are the types of capacities and skills that young people might be able to develop as a result of this work? What might be possible? And then starting to think about, all right, well, how could that look in the different settings where you all might be working, right? And where you might also have partnerships. So I want to explore, some different examples of what this can look like, what this has looked like with different partnerships that we have supported. And I really encourage folks to think about, the wide variety and range of different ways that you could potentially engage young people in these kinds of processes, right? While, there are certainly efforts that could take an entire school year, or even at times could move into a second or third school year, right? Because as we I'm sure can acknowledge that change processes can be long, and sometimes can take multiple cohorts of young people working in tandem and collaboration with one another over a period of time. But that's not the only way that a process like this could be facilitated, right? We could think about it happening in various settings and with various different types of issue areas that youth might be able to explore. And in various types of timelines and efforts as well. So, providing some examples of some of the efforts that we've been engaged in as a starting point to think about, what might be possible for you all in thinking about this work. and where it is that you're engaging with young people. As some examples, certainly within classrooms is one way that this could be facilitated. And as some examples of folks that we've worked with, we've worked with folks in classes where young people have decided to investigate cafeteria food waste, as an example, where they've learned how to log and measure a representative sample of food that is discarded during their school lunches. And by thinking about, what is being eaten and what is not being eaten, that allows them to then think about, well, how might we, make different choices about what's being served, but also recognizing the potential food insecurity that's happening at our campuses. How might we reclaim the food that some youth don't want and be able to save it for the youth that might actually want it, right? So that's one example, and that was done both in a classroom, but also with a career technical education teacher who was working with multiple classes across multiple high school sites within the same district. So that teacher was actually able to support a number of different classes to all come together around one research topic, exploring the same research question at their various campuses, and then aggregating that data to both be able to say what's happening individually at their campuses, but also look a bit of a bigger picture at what's happening across their district, and be able to, push for even wider changes to happen. Another example of working, within the same school, but within multiple classes was with another career technical ed teacher who was looking at physical activity. And in this instance, the teacher's subject matter had alignment. They were a sports medicine class. And so being able to think about physical activity opportunities that existed either in their community or in their campus, and being able to research those, and then be able to engage with also community partners who are working on safe routes to school, and others who are engaged in the wider community efforts to increase physical activity and physical activity opportunities. These young people were able to both work within the classroom, but also work with the wider community. So you can think about in class. Other examples, there are folks who could certainly incorporate this into, say, ethnic studies classes. Another example of a project that we supported a number of years back was at Davis High School, where young people were looking at racial justice and racial equity issues on their campus. And through the efforts of one youth cohort and then a continuing YPAR process at that high school, they were actually able to embed and institutionalize YPAR as a practice in their class. And through that actually created a course that met the history A through G requirement, and has multiple sections that are taught now. And so that was one way that they were actually able to, make YPAR a part of the class, a part of the effort that young people are engaging in, tied to the subject matter, but then also meeting A through G requirements for youth. So a lot of creative ways that this could be, more of a one-off, shorter unit in a classroom, or maybe could encompass, the entire school year as something that youth are working on throughout the year and building towards and building skills in, right? So certainly in class, something that you all could be considering and thinking about, what could this look like where I'm working and with the partners that I'm engaged with and the youth that I'm engaged with. Of course, out of school time, as we mentioned with that initial example, another opportunity for ways to engage youth. And some of the efforts that we've supported have worked with either after school clubs that have groups of youth coming together around particular topics or interests, and then have allowed them to explore those through research and through advocacy and change-making efforts. And so just a couple of examples, again, coming from our partners with CalFresh Healthy Living UC, young people in Contra Costa who are looking at water access and appeal at their high schools, and came together as part of an out-of-school time program to research that and to push for changes within their school site. Again, another opportunity where youth both were examining issues at their school, but also did research within the wider community, looking at water access, not only on campus, but also where were young people accessing water in the community, and what did that look like, even incorporated some water quality testing to think about what young people had access to in the community spaces. And then, in Imperial County, young people are looking at gardening in their school campus and ways to tie that to a farm to school program, also exploring opportunities or lack of opportunities for gardening in the wider community, and thinking about ways that they could expand that, again, in partnership with other community groups and others who are working within those spaces. So opportunities really for intergenerational, relationship building and collective work. So out of school time, another great opportunity for bringing youth together to be able to focus on issues that they care about and build these skills. And then there's also opportunities for thinking about how this could be done in a district-wide effort. And so, we've worked with a couple of school districts as examples, both Folsom Cordova Unified and Sacramento City Unified School Districts, who've had district-wide student leadership teams, advisory boards made up of leaders who are coming from various school sites across the district, who come together regularly, who are focused on student leadership, who often are also engaging with the school board, often includes, the one or more student representatives who sit on the school boards. And then that's an opportunity where, you really could be engaging multiple school sites, again, across the district, bringing youth representatives from all of those spaces to think about issue areas that might span the district and how young people could, develop leadership, connect with one another, build relationships, but also develop a research plan and a process that could really explore the wide range of possibilities and issues that might exist across the district. So those are a couple of examples where, within district embedded youth leadership and student leadership efforts, how you might think about embedding, how you might think about it, engaging young people. And of course, many issues that youth could be thinking about approaching with those, of course, areas like school climate, mental health support. Dress code is certainly one that seems to come up often as well when it comes to young people and some of the issues they're facing. And then even thinking about, youth being involved in LCAP planning, right? That, LCAP really is intended to have, a lot of components that are engaging with community, with parents, with students. And this could be a really great opportunity for youth to help identify really key priority areas for LCAP funding, focused on how to support those student populations that are really called out within the LCAP process that are meant to receive those additional funds. And, how could student leadership and research be a part of, identifying and designating those priorities, right? And then as another opportunity to explore with the district-wide effort, we've been working with the Early Academic Outreach Program here at UC Davis, bringing together, again, youth representatives from across various high schools, but not specifically within a district-run youth leadership program, but more so with a community partner, EAOP, to explore English learner college enrollment. And in this instance, we're working with English learner students in thinking about barriers to their enrollment in college and universities, and researching, what could be some of the ways in which they could really help improve those pathways for other English learner students in the district. So another district-wide opportunity that might not be embedded within a district leadership structure for youth, but could be in connection with a partner, in this case, a university-based partner. So a lot of different ways in thinking about how we might situate this, the different types of issues that young people might be able to focus on, the different ways they might interact with other bodies and with other groups, and interact intergenerationally. And so it's important to note that, while a lot of these processes and resources may be geared towards working directly with youth and youth-driven processes, oftentimes, we really do see a great potential for intergenerational work. And this certainly could support adults and youth, working together on these efforts. And so when, thinking about, all the different ways in which we might be able to utilize this approach and modify it and adapt it to fit the needs and fit the areas where you're working with young people, I want to think a little bit about, what are those potential impacts? Like, why might we consider doing this? And, we can think about the impacts in a few different ways, right? We could think about impacts for young people themselves who are participating, and for the other youth, who might not be participating, but might be impacted by the decisions at the institutions, and then also thinking about our wider communities. So certainly for the youth themselves, of course, there are wonderful opportunities in participating in a YPAR project to develop key skills in research, in collective decision-making, in team building, right, in relationship building, right, a lot of networking opportunities and intergenerational opportunities, opportunities to explore potentially new career paths or new educational paths for them as well, and a lot of opportunities to develop their leadership capacity and skills, right? There's definitely, great opportunities for enhanced and experiential learning as a result of this, so ways that youth could be acting, could be having key experiences, could be reflecting on those experiences, and then utilizing that to then, continue to make decisions moving forward. And then, of course, the opportunity for young people to enact actual change and lasting change around issues that are important to them in their communities as well, right? For our institutions, our schools, our districts, the ability for new and or improved services, programs, and solutions that are really grounded in the needs and and desires of the young people themselves who are most directly impacted by these decisions. And through that, the ability to develop greater youth ownership and buy-in at our institutions, right? How do we really get young people bought into what's happening? Well, this is one way, by really sharing power, right? And by really, when it comes to equity, really putting our money where our mouth is, right? And really, how do we share that power with young people in a way that's really going to have a direct impact on things they care about? And of course, there's great ways to enhance your staff skills and development as well. How do folks learn how to facilitate these processes, work with youth in these kinds of ways, and support youth-driven efforts as well? And for our communities, we benefit from having increased perspectives and stakeholders who are engaged in what's happening in our communities. Community development efforts certainly benefit from that. We benefit from intergenerational relationship building and collective work. And we benefit from enhanced leadership development in our communities, right? Again, young people not just being the leaders of the future, but literally being leaders now who can directly impact what's happening in our communities in really important and positive ways. And so when thinking about, how might you start to consider and assess your own conditions and situations, and what might it look like to lay a foundation for YPAR where you are, you want to think about institutional readiness. What does that look like? Do we have staff who have the capacity and time to devote to an effort like this? Do we have the resources to fund staff time and or fund young people to be a part of this effort and to take on these roles, to feed them, to have a meeting space, right, to resource this effort effectively? How might we do this? When might we do this? What kinds of timelines could we be looking at? What types of parameters might we be dealing with in thinking about how we plan a project, and how open it can be to youth decision making, or maybe it's within a more limited scope based on our needs, funding, etc., right? And really thinking about what are those opportunities for youth agency and decision making. Certainly the importance of training, skill building, having access to and knowing how to utilize key resources. And then not only that, but also are there opportunities for ongoing support? And, hoping that this conversation starter here could maybe be a launching point for exploring more of this with all of you, right? Ways in which we could be connecting both us and you, also you with one another, right, to continue to build a network of support and a community of practice that might be able to keep moving this kind of work forward. And then, strategizing, how do we navigate the times that we're living in currently, right? Understanding that we are dealing with extreme societal polarization. And of course, you all in the educational system often being at the forefront of some of those conversations. So what does it look like to create an inclusive environment and to prepare institutions for youth leadership, for youth decision making, for youth maybe highlighting or identifying, issue areas that might be uncomfortable for some folks to think about or to talk about? And how do we, prepare ourselves and our institutions to have those kinds of conversations, to engage with youth authentically and intentionally, and to really support these processes, right? So, this provides a quick overview of what YPAR, is, what it can look like, ways in which you might think about situating it in your own institutions where you're working, and some of the considerations you might have. I want to pause here, and we want to launch a quick poll for folks in processing a bit of what you've heard, whether you're coming to this, brand new to YPAR or having some background experience. We'd like to see maybe how folks are already doing this work and what kind of considerations they're thinking about at the moment. So I'm going to pause, let us launch a quick poll here. And as you'll see, this just has one question. Where have you already implemented YPAR, and or where are you considering implementing it? And we're asking folks to please select all the options that apply. So again, thinking about it maybe as part of a class, as part of an out-of-school time program, a district-wide effort with a community-based organization or network, or maybe you're thinking of other ways in which you have or could be implementing that. And for that, please do type that into the chat to us. Carmen is going to be staffing that and could be able to report back any additional ideas that you all have. But let's take a moment, give folks a chance to consider this, where you're already doing this work or might think about doing this work, either for yourselves or with partners, and give you a chance to respond.
And so I just want to make sure that everyone has access to the poll. It says, I see from Amy that there's no poll visible yet. So Pamela, if you might be able to double check that. I see another comment that it's not visible. And so
Sorry about that. In that case, maybe if folks just want to chat in.
I think it just came in.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, great.
Oh, perfect.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Yeah. So we do see some responses coming through. Thank you all. And again, if you do have other ideas or other comments, please do put them in the chat. We are capturing that. We definitely will be following up with folks as well and can share the collective knowledge and wisdom back to everyone who's participating today too. So please do utilize that space as well to share your additional thoughts. So I think we've got just about everyone in. I'm going to just end it here and share that back with you all. So as you can see, we've got folks thinking about it as part of a class or part of an out-of-school time program, majority, but also maybe a district-wide effort, or also in collaboration with community-based orgs. And Carmen, was there anything in the chat as far as additional ideas that you wanted to share out?
Not pertaining to the poll.
All right, no worries.
I see someone saying as part of an Upward Bound summer program. Another idea. That
would be great. Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. And folks, feel free to continue to generate additional ideas into that space as well. I'm going to stop that share. And so, we also wanted to make sure that folks are familiar with some resources and tools that could help you do this work. And this forms the basis of a lot of the training and coaching that we provide for the partners that we work with. I know, we recommended that folks maybe take a look at this. So maybe you've seen a little bit of it, before attending today, but if not, the Community Futures Community Lore, YPAR resources from the Center for Regional Change and School of Education are a really great resource that you could utilize to learn more about, how to do this work, to learn more about what folks have done previously, but also to really plan and facilitate your own projects. And so this work is really building upon over 3 decades of effort by a number of organizations, and really draws from the collective efforts of community members, young people. What I want to share is that, I want to jump on the Community Futures Community Lore website really quickly, just to show you a bit about what's there, how you can find things, so that folks are familiar with that. But there's a lot of information. And so a lot of what we do, again, with folks in our training and coaching is, helping them orient themselves to that space and use it as a tool to plan out what kind of project they're looking to do and prioritize, what kinds of tools and activities they'd want to utilize as a part of that effort. So I'm here on the homepage. If you haven't seen it yet, we do have a really quick introductory video that's embedded here, and that's on YouTube, that provides an overview of both YPAR and the site. So that could be a really helpful refresher for folks as well. We see the site as serving a few functions. Certainly want folks to be able to utilize it to learn more about YPAR, to see what other folks have done, to see more examples, and to think about how they might implement it themselves. And then we really have it as well as a planning tool and guide for how to think about implementing this in your own space and how to actually plan and facilitate your efforts. And so when it comes to learning more about it, there are a number of spaces where you can do that. We have stories here. And again, we highlighted a few for folks as potential, preliminary reading ahead of this session. So there are some both within the education space, but also looking at other spaces where folks have implemented YPAR and other issue areas. So we have both larger case studies, smaller snapshots of previous projects that folks can explore. And we also have a spreadsheet of over 100 previous projects that folks have done through the various organizations that help develop these materials. So you can look through these by topic area, by age, by location. These are all hyperlinked. So for example, you could just jump into education and equity projects, and you can see, where they took place, what age ranges they were working with, a summary of what young people did. And so this is a great way to potentially see, what have folks done in my community maybe previously, or what have young people done around the same issue that we care about? How can we learn from previous efforts that youth have done? How can we connect ourselves to that really incredible legacy of youth advocacy and organizing and research? And what is it that we can take from this that can inspire us, that can help move our efforts forward? So this is a great tool to help folks connect to previous work and learn from previous work. Also on the website, we do have a frequently asked questions section that is really geared towards key questions that come up when folks tend to think about implementing YPAR and what it could mean for them, right? So where has it been effective? What is the role of adults in YPAR? How do you know if you're ready to take on a project, right? Each of these is expandable and has some initial thoughts from our own experiences of how you might approach some of these key questions and concerns. Again, when thinking about how do I implement this, what have folks done before, and what might this look like in our own settings and in our own projects. And we'll note that we do have links to some other resources as well. So there are a number of folks, within this space and within this work who do really incredible work and have developed some other tools and resources. And we have links to those as well here on our site for folks to utilize. And then finally, when it comes to utilizing this as a planning tool, as a facilitation guide, we have the stepping stones. And that's where we really lay out those stages for YPAR and have a facilitation guide tied to each of those key stages. So you'll see here, you can download that poster that we utilized in the PowerPoint earlier that shows you the different stages. And for each of those steps 1 through 9, we have a landing page and we have resources tied to it that you can utilize. So for example, in stepping stone 3, when you're looking to choose a focus for your project, on the landing page, we've got a brief description of, the potential time commitment for this stage. What are the key objectives that you might consider that you're trying to accomplish with your team during this phase? And then what are the different activities, materials, and resources associated with those objectives that you might consider incorporating into your meetings and into your sessions, right? And then to help you do that, we have a downloadable PDF guide that actually walks you through each of those tools. And you can flip through the different stepping stones at the bottom here and also at the top to kind of look through those different spaces. And when you actually go to that downloadable guide and download the PDF for each stepping stone, showing you an example of what that looks like here for stepping stone 3. You'll see the PDF guide also starts with a layout of where you are in the process to orient yourselves, what you've done previously, where you might be headed, and what you're trying to accomplish now in this stage. We lay out again the kind of key objectives and activities and stages, along with some facilitators' tips for what you might consider at this point of your project. And then for each of those activities, you'll see they come with key objectives, the potential time you might need, the materials that you'd need to facilitate them, and then full instructions for how to go about doing those activities with young people. So this is really, a way that you could, look at what you're trying to accomplish within each stage of a project, have some key facilitation tools to organize a meeting with youth. What are you trying to accomplish, and then how to actually lay that out and do that. And, a key point to recognize here is, this is a toolkit. It's not meant to be a curriculum that requires strict fidelity, right? That YPAR is really by its nature meant to be context specific, meeting youth where they are, meeting communities where they are, adapting them to fit their needs. And so we not only encourage folks, but really it's required for you to take this and to make it your own, right? You really need to adapt this to fit your needs. And so a lot of the coaching and support that we provide is around that. How do folks know what's here and how to use it? But most importantly, know how to fit this within the context of where they're working and the youth that they're supporting. So how do you adapt this and how do you, fit it within your context and within your needs? So that's a really quick overview of the site that folks can utilize. And, I want to just jump back in here to the PowerPoint as well to just kind of, take us through some final thoughts here as we look to kind of close this out and move into a Q&A piece. And so, in thinking about potentially where do we go from here, what do we look to do, maybe after this effort is completed, after today's conversation, we're certainly thinking about this as the initial conversation point, right? So, this is meant to provide an introduction, is to help get people inspired in seeing, what this framework looks like and could potentially entail, what others have done and what youth have been able to accomplish utilizing these strategies and fitting them to their needs and their context. Learning about some resources that could support you in doing that kind of work effectively. And then, really getting connected with us and potentially with each other and thinking about, how do I process this and marinate on this a little bit, but where might I want to go with this afterwards? And so, this is certainly a really quick opportunity to learn a lot up front, but we recognize that, there really is a more prolonged approach and intentionality that's required to help people embed this within, the work that they're doing. And so with that in mind, some potential next steps that this group is offering and considering and wanting to gauge interest in from you all is, thinking about the potential for this to be one in maybe a series of more in-depth trainings that could be potentially done online, but also maybe in person as well. So thinking about what is the potential for further training and conversation, what is the potential and interest for maybe some one-on-one coaching and technical assistance for folks to implement this, and then also thinking what is the potential for larger collective ways of doing that. Could it be a network of practitioners or a community of practice where folks are also connecting with and learning from what other people are doing and connecting with folks of varied YPAR experience, right? So again, we want to gauge your interest levels. So I'm going to ask the team here to launch our second poll here. That's just intended to think about where are you all currently in your thinking, and what might be a useful next stage for continuing this conversation forward. So as you can see here, the question that we're posing is the next steps I'm interested in are, and again, please select all that apply, further reviewing materials from this webinar, in-depth training workshop or workshops, individual support for planning and facilitating a YPAR project, networking with colleagues of varied YPAR experience levels. And again, we have an other option, and we encourage folks to add their thoughts into chat as well. So I see some responses coming through. I'm going to pause, let folks take a moment to respond. We'll share back the results here. They're still coming in, so I'm going to give folks a little more time here. And it looks like they might be tapering off. So I'm going to end the poll and share those results back with folks here. So it looks like, a number of folks interested in continuing to review the materials afterwards, continue to process what we've covered here and think about how it might relate to your work and your interests and the young people that you're connected with. We've got some folks who might be interested in some additional training opportunities, maybe some individual support, and also some potential networking with their colleagues as well. Anything shared in the chat connected to this, Carmen?
Nope, nothing in the chat.
All right. So thank you all for that. And again, we really look to follow up with folks after this about those next steps as well, to see how we can continue to move this conversation forward and continue to build with you all. So finally, I want to just open up some space here for some Q&A. So, with the support of Carmen and the rest of the team, see, what kinds of questions have been percolating, what's coming through, and try and address as many of them as we can in the time that we have remaining. And then, with the opportunity to continue to follow up with folks after this as well.
So I do have two questions here, and they are kind of in a similar, they're connected. Sure. So the first one is from Chris. How can teachers make a small step towards youth action without engaging in a full-blown project? Mm-hmm. How do we move the needle on classroom practice even just a little bit? What are some first steps? And he stated that teachers are really overwhelmed right now with so many frameworks and initiatives coming down the pipe in California.
Yes. So definitely, first off, want to acknowledge that my partner is actually an educator as well. And so certainly understand what folks are dealing with right now and the many concerns and challenges and barriers that both our young people and our educators are facing. And so it's a really great question to think about, how might we scaffold this? And that's definitely something that we've worked really intentionally around, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic and the especially limited capacity that folks were dealing with, in addition to moving into distance learning. And so, part of what we did in collaboration with our partners at CalFresh Healthy Living UC was develop some, scaffolded models that were a bit more time delimited, right? That would have just a smaller sequence or series of activities that, to your point, Chris, might not get us fully into a full research effort, right? That might not get us fully into an action component. And that might require greater adult decision-making, in setting the parameters, and there, in turn would, limit some of the youth agency and decision-making through that process, but would still have the capabilities of exposing both adult facilitators and allies and young people to these processes, to some of these activities and conversations, helping them to, approach this in a way that might be more feasible, less intimidating, but also, building their confidence levels. And then, helping them think through, if I could do this stepping stone or building block, how might I look to do something maybe larger or more involved, or look to, support greater youth decision-making agency and key points in the process in a future event. And so that's certainly something that we've worked to develop, and something that we could support folks in thinking about, what might be a more limited series of activities from the stepping stones that get at some of the key principles that are, in the same vein of, say, YPAR, without necessarily being a full YPAR project. So, I think the key elements are, how are we getting youth to connect to their own lived experience, to see themselves as experts? How are we helping youth think about what's important to them, what they care about in their communities, what might already exist, what knowledge might be out there already about the issues they care about, and then thinking about, how do I capture my own story or the stories of, other youth or community members in a way that's interesting and compelling, and that we might be able to collect, analyze, and share back out to other folks, right? So it's getting exposed to some of those processes that, again, might not entail an entire project, but through that exposure, the confidence that it builds, the skills that you're still building in that, could get people really feeling excited about doing something that might be on a larger scale, feeling more confident about it, and thinking about how they could integrate that.
And a follow-up comment to that Chris had mentioned also is, as the state rolls out a lot of environmental literature and justice resources, teachers are going to be called to incorporate some youth action into their lesson plans. I'm really interested in thinking about how to support teachers, especially those who may feel a bit like an island as they take on some of this response to youth's desire for engaging with climate change and solutions to climate issues and environmental injustice. It's going to be an exciting but sometimes difficult landscape. Just as you, Brandon, were talking about, it's difficult, uncomfortable conversations about equity, injustice, and racism.
Yeah, I mean, really, really great points. And I appreciate you lifting this up, Chris, because, certainly, when it comes to issues that young people care about and are passionate about, of course, climate change and climate justice and environmental justice efforts are really top of the list for a lot of young people. And there's a lot of energy and youth organizing and youth advocacy work that's happening in that space. So it is a great opportunity for educators to engage youth around these topics and to be able to connect both some of the subject matter that they might be learning about in the classroom to their own experiences and what might be happening, in their communities, and to think about, how might we explore this further, what's happening in our communities, but also exploring solutions and solutions that are coming from the perspectives of young people who are at the front lines in a lot of these communities, right? And are dealing with a lot of these impacts. And so, I think that's a really great way in thinking about, what are some of the potential issue areas, priority areas within the education sphere, and potential for, really incorporating greater youth voice, greater youth leadership, greater, youth research and experience and expertise, that is not just, purely about knowledge base, right, in our classrooms, but literally is about solutions that we all need, right? Like, we need young people to be in these conversations for the good of all of us and the planet. And that's just a great way of thinking about why YPAR and supporting youth leadership in these ways is so critical for all of the work that we do and for all of us in our communities. So I want to thank you all for joining us and for working with us through these technical difficulties. I want to pass it back to Tina just to wrap us out, and I'll stop the share here.
So there was just one more question, which is kind of related to the first question. So you might have already answered it, but if you have anything to add, Brandon. So Andy had a question. He said, scaffolding this for teachers is always a challenge when they may see it as yet another thing and a lot more work. And he asked about tools for starting small. So if there's anything else you want to add to what you've already said.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the previous answer, I think, covers some of that. And, I think that's an area where we'd love to explore that further with folks. And it sounds like that could be a potential topic that we might want to cover in like, a next session or conversation. So I appreciate folks, bringing that up.
Great. Thank you so much, Carmen and Brandon. So thank you everyone for joining us. We will be in touch with a follow-up email with additional resources, suggestions, and also a feedback link. If you'd please give us feedback on the webinar, we'd really appreciate that. And stay tuned. We'll plan on having a part 2 of this. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.